I just wanted to talk about the Nashville school shooting that happened yesterday. Obviously, it's a horror that this happened in the first place. One young man was injured. One 16-year-old girl has died as a result of the shooting, and the shooter himself shot himself. But there's something interesting to talk about regarding this, which is that modernity, and particularly access to the internet, but for teenagers and young people in general, is an absolute mess. It's an absolute mess because this kid was clearly mentally ill and clearly spent far too much time online and decided to commit an atrocity. He was also black, so it's another one to add to the black kids committing school shootings, which some would argue had more to do with this than the political ideology side of it. But the political ideology side of it is interesting to look at, especially because it seems to have some connections to other politically motivated school shootings that happened over the past few months. And this incident took place relatively close to the Nashville Christian school, the elementary school that was shot up a few years ago by the trans shooter, who also had a manifesto, which we only had recently gained access to bits and pieces of it. The police were mainly trying to keep that away from the public eye. So the report is that one student is dead, another wounded after a third student opened fire with a pistol on Wednesday at Antioch High School in Nashville, Tennessee. The 17-year-old shooter, who was called Solomon Henderson, shot himself and died as well. The police spokesman, a man called Dan Aaron, said there is no danger at the school. The two victims were taken to a hospital where a female student died and a male student was treated for a graze wound to his arm. Aaron clarified that the gender of the wounded student at a later briefing. Police identified the female student as Jocelyn Correa Escalante, 16 years old. The shooter was identified as 17 years old. He went to the school, a guy called Solomon Henderson. Police said the authorities were examining very concerning online writings and social media posts connected to the shooter as part of the investigation. The shooting was partially live-streamed on the streaming platform Kick, according to a statement from the company. Kick said it had removed the video from its platform and banned the account. Violence has no place on Kick, they said. We are actively working with law enforcement and taking all appropriate steps to support their investigation. So obviously, these are relatively isolated incidents, but it does seem to be that more often than you would like now, you get these insane teenagers who writing manifestos and shooting up schools. It's a pretty worrying trend, and the manifesto has been the highlight of a lot of people talking about this because he posted it on his Instagram, which has now been taken down, and there was a Google document that was available for people to read through, and the thing was confusing and scattershot and just weird, to say the absolute least. So we have a picture of the guy. This is confirmed as the shooter, Solomon Henderson. You'll notice that he's wearing a Burzum hoodie in this.
What hoodie?
Burzum. They are a Norwegian ambient / black metal band headed by Varg Vikernes, who was a notorious murderer.
Everything you're saying is new to me.
Notorious murderer and white supremacist.
A band.
It's basically a solo project. He was in a previous band called Mayhem, and he murdered the bassist because he suspected the bassist wanted to murder him. It was early 90s Norwegian black metal stuff, completely insane.
It's just really dark.
Really dark stuff. The kind of band where one of them blew their own brains out and they took a photo of it and used it as an album cover. Stuff like that. So not the sort of band or artist that you would expect a 17-year-old black kid in America to be into, especially given that the guy like Varg Vikernes, I think he lives in France now.
Pretty obscure. Oh, what? He's not in prison?
He got out of prison. He served his time.
Oh, right.
He served his time.
Okay.
But yeah, he's a pretty he's like a pagan Norse white supremacist type
Murderer.
Right.
Well. Okay.
Yeah. So not the kind of guy that you would expect to be listening to that kind of thing, but also not the kind of guy that you would expect to write this. I'm not going to read out the words, and that's where this. Obviously, this is a tragedy, but there is a bit of an absurd comedy aspect to this as well, given that he named it the N-Cell manifesto, and you can see the opening page
Is this just a young virgin that is extremely angry?
I would expect
About-
so. I would expect it,
that.
and spent far too much time on 4chan and managed to get himself invested in a lot of weird esoteric politics,
Okay.
and then decided to shoot,
Thing is,
shoot school.
I said this when we did a segment a few weeks ago about that girl who went on some sort of killing spree. Do you remember that? A girl shooter.
Yes, the femcell shooter
Yeah.
who was quoted in her own manifesto as having been inspired by Radfem Hitler.
And she was, what was she, 16? I think she was 16, 15 or 16.
She was mutuals on Twitter with this guy, which is a weird connection between the two of them.
And I said that, what I'm about to say, in that segment, but I'll say it again. You don't know your arse from your elbow when you're that age.
No, of course not.
Don't know what you're doing or talking about. You have not read enough, known enough, lived enough to, I don't know how, because quite often, suicide bombers and all sorts of spree killers are often, very often, very, very, very young. These are particularly young, but they're very, very young. It's because one of the things, I think, the psychology of it is that you convince yourself that you're absolutely certain. I know what it was like, the arrogance of youth. I remember being 16 or 17 and thinking I know everything. The small amount of reading I have done, the small amount of TV and documentaries I have watched, I feel like I've got a handle on everything. And the reality of you absolutely haven't. You absolutely haven't. But you can't tell often you can't tell teenagers that.
I mean, as far as I know,
the world will stomp that arrogance out of you in your 20s, probably.
Whether or not you had that kind of arrogance to you, I don't think you went as far as to write your own mentally insane manifesto.
No, of course not. No. But because these are an extreme pathology, aren't they? These people that write this and then actually go on to do violent things. Any way you cut it, that's a very, very extreme pathology, and a very, very small number of people do that. But I mean, it's just like a perfect storm of hubris, arrogance, violence, and the ability to get your hands on a gun, and I don't know, and a nihilism, obviously a suicidal tendency, all those things, being extremely unhappy. Obviously, not obviously, but it seems like with the N-cell thing, extremely angry.
And also
sad.
Very, very confused and very conflicted.
Very
confused. Because listen to this. Death to the current state of the West. This book is dedicated to accelerationism and violence by an N for victory. Death to all mamsers. No idea what that is. I don't know. I'm not this terminally online to know what a mamser is. This book is dedicated to world dominance by the N. Genocide them and loot everything. This is blah, blah, blah. Death to Israel, but also death to Palestine. Part of this makes it come across like a bit of a shitpost, if I'm honest. Like he was planning on doing the shooting maybe for more personal reasons, and because he was terminally online, decided to make the most ideologically confused and scattershot manifesto ever, just to really confuse people after he was dead. Because that's what it comes across like. Of course,
I don't want to make enemies of all 17-year-olds out there, but that's classic 17-year-old, just a stream of nonsense, really.
Yeah, again, it seems like he was involved in a lot of weird stuff online. He included in the manifesto his social medias, which people on Kiwi Farms and 4chan immediately tracked down, found out that he was somehow attached to a strange sect of groypers, who are like a nonce clique of groypers.
Clique.
Clique.
All right, okay.
Of groypers. Very strange. And then, of course, people discovered that he was a mutual with the femcell shooter from a few months ago, and also, which of course is a very, very strange connection. But he had been posting about saying she did nothing wrong. I've not done anything wrong by supporting her. Yeah, very, very strange.
He said she did nothing wrong. Stop bullying. So he's bullied.
I mean, he said, well, actually,
I would have thought.
Actually, there's a Q&A. There's a Q&A in his manifesto where he said, please ignore the soy jacks. Are you a victim of bullying? No, I'm not. I've never been bullied. I've never been bullied once. But then he also says,
yeah, right.
Are you a white supremacist? No, I'm a golden N. It wouldn't make sense for me to be one. I can't be a white supremacist. So are you a black supremacist? No, I wouldn't be if Ns weren't so effing retarded. TND. which I believe is a reference to a 4chan meme.
So he got some sort of god complex.
Very, very strange. And then also, he's just throwing out as many names and confusing people as possible. His Instagram account, which people found, listed himself as the last true Rhodesian. And then when in his manifesto he was speaking about the particular groups or people that radicalized him the most, this is going to be the part that, if the mainstream media cover this a bit more, will be highlighted, because he names Candace Owens, Ethan Ralph, Nick Fuentes, but then Turkey Tom, Mr. Beast.
I don't know who Turkey Tom or Ethan Ralph are. I don't know
iDubbbz, Destiny, and Hassan Piker. So he's naming like right wing, and then also centrists, and then insane leftists. But then he says, Candace Owens has influenced me. Above all, each time she spoke, I was stunned by her insights, and her own views helped me push me further and further into the belief of violence over the JQ, along with Turkey Tom. Turkey Tom makes, like...
This is truly a confused mess.
He makes fun YouTube videos talking about, like, dark characters or internet drama.
I've been radicalised by both Candace Owens and Destiny. Okay, okay, dude, okay.
And Hassan misspelled Piker. And iDubbbz as well. Obviously, iDubbbz has got a lot to answer for. And then he goes on here to say, do you have any groups that are backing you? Yes, the Markiplier subreddit.
The what? What Reddit?
The Markiplier subreddit.
What's that?
He's a YouTuber, a gaming YouTuber, who, as far as I'm aware, has never made any political content on his YouTube channel. So this just seems to be
just a complete mishmash of nonsense.
Throw all the shit at the wall to confuse people. But I can guarantee that if the news decide to start running with this, they are going to pick up on the Candace Owens has influenced me. Candace Owens inspires Nashville school shooter. That's what it's going to be if this carries on. But it's so strange that this is becoming something of a minor trend now, that mentally ill teenagers will commit an atrocious act, kill people, and then have a manifesto ready to be discovered immediately after. It's a horrifying part of modernity, and honestly, I do think that this guy, no matter what the circumstances of his life would have been a danger to others, because it's not just... You don't just give any child access to the internet and they immediately become a school shooter, but I do think that this kind of thing shows that just kids these days, I sound like an old man, spend way too much time online. It's so easy to get sucked into these circles and become terminally online, and I think that kids should just be left alone from the internet. They shouldn't be able to have access to everything that is on there.
No, absolutely, because, I mean, the internet, the completely unfiltered internet, is sort of all of humanity spilled out,
and
right?
Mostly its worst parts as well.
It is whatever you want to make it, right? So you can find the most inspiring, beautiful things on there, and the most dark, disgusting, depraved things, right? So, I mean...
And again, I don't say that every child who has access to the internet immediately falls into this. It's just worrying that this happens in the first place. I mean, good God.
I mean, I grew up, all my formative years were pre-internet years, basically. I was already a very young adult by the time you had the really, really crappy modem dial-up type internet. And they're just... So I'd already sort of formed my sense of ethics and morals by that point. But if you were a little kid, it's really, really worrying.
Even if you keep your own kids off the internet, the sort of disgusting things that they can be exposed to by other kids if they have access to the internet, it's terrible.
I self-censor you, right? I deliberately don't look at the most disgusting things.
Oh, me too.
Very much so. I remember the last time there was during the Syrian war. At one point, ISIS got hold of, I think, captured a Jordanian downed pilot, and they put him in a cage and set him alive. And it was all over the internet that this had happened, and there's loads of clicks everywhere. I think even links everywhere. I think even the Sun newspaper had a link to the video if you want to see it. It was around that point I made a conscious decision that I'm not going to see it. I've never seen that clip to this day. I don't want to see it. And I used to follow a few people on Twitter that would quite often post what is effectively snuff footage, CCTV footage of someone getting murdered in America or whatever, and I've had to mute them or unfollow them because I don't want that in my memory banks. Okay, but I was like a 30-year-old, 40-year-old dude making that decision. If you're 10 years old and someone just puts a phone in front of you in the playground, or you're 15-year-old and you're just dark, and you're actively searching this out and filling your mind with horrors, yeah, it's a worry.
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. I mean, obviously, I'm stating the obvious here, but...
And there's not much else to say about it,
What
really.
can be done? I mean, other than passing laws saying until you're 18, you're sort of not allowed the completely unfiltered internet until you're at least 18 or something. I don't know.
Then there's practical issues about that. How do you?
Yeah, how would you ever
that,
enforce
right?
that? Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So not much else to say about that. Just a horrible situation and very confusing in the aftermath.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can always follow our series Lads Hour, where we have a bunch of fun. This time we were talking about which world leader wins in a fight. And if you want to see everything else that we're putting out, you can always follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.